In this video, I'm going to break down the most frequently asked questions that I get about remote hiring. Whether it's about how to find great talent, what tools I use, how to train them, how to manage them, I'm going to break down everything. And then by the end of this video, you're going to have clarity, you'll have a clear roadmap, and answers to all of the biggest questions that generally come up when it comes to hiring remotely. This is all based on helping hundreds of different business owners hire, placing thousands of individual VAs, and hiring over 100 VAs for myself personally across my 3 companies. All right, so let's get into the first question. The first question to me is quite silly, but I could understand why some people would ask it, but they say, will they speak English? So in my staffing company, we help US-based business owners hire in a number of different countries, but primarily Mexico and Colombia in Latin America, and then the Philippines, Egypt, and South Africa. So in South Africa in particular, they speak English as their first language. So if you're hiring someone there, the answer is unequivocally yes. And then in all the other countries, Mexico, Colombia, the Philippines, and Egypt, there's a very high level of English fluency in those countries. Anyone that you're gonna hire, especially through us, will obviously speak English. I think this is a bit of a funny question, to be honest, because I've traveled to dozens of countries myself at this point. And assuming you're in a major metropolitan area, really in any country in the world, people speak English. So if you're considering hiring someone remotely from really any country in the world, as long as you're hiring in a major city, there should be plenty of people to choose from with great English fluency, and you won't have to worry about communication. Now, the other question that ties into this that people have is, will they have a really strong accent? And if I put them on the phone with clients, or maybe they're cold calling, or they're in a customer service role, will they sound like an Indian scammer in a call center that's calling people? And the answer to that is no. There's plenty of people, and by plenty, I mean literally like hundreds of thousands of people that you can hire globally who have perfect English and very neutral accents. Now, there's a lot of people that will apply to these remote jobs that have strong accents, but just by the sheer volume of people that end up applying, you can eliminate those people and focus on the ones that have the kind of tonality and communication that you're looking for. I have another company, it's a call center, and in that company, our clients constantly ask us this exact question. And to be quite direct with you, if I only hired people with strong accents, I probably would have gone out of business a long time ago. So while it does require some extra work and some extra sifting and having a huge funnel to find people with that really good tonality that's like borderline American, or maybe even they actually sound American. If you put in the work and you have enough exposure in terms of people applying to your job, you'll find plenty of people with perfect English and very neutral accents. And like I said before, sometimes they actually sound American. One last thing to note before wrapping up this question is that there's a lot of people in the US with accents, so it's really not even that big of a deal. The only time I find it being kind of a bigger deal is if the business owner's customers live in the South. They tend to be a little bit more like standoffish towards foreigners. All right, so now that we cleared out those very, very basic elementary questions, which honest to God, you should not even be thinking about at this point if you got it this far in this video. Hopefully I just squashed that objection in your mind. The next thing people ask, what countries do I actually hire from? So there's tons of countries that you could hire from. You could go through all of Central and South America. You could go to the Philippines, South Africa, you could go to Eastern Europe, you could hire in the Middle East. Like there's tons of different options. Now, myself, I focus on a couple countries in particular. That's where I find the kind of talent that I'm specifically looking for. And that's where I've found the most consistent positive results. And these are the countries that we help our clients hire from as well. So we focus on the following regions: the Philippines, Egypt, South Africa, and Latin America. And then within Latin America, we usually find the best candidates in Mexico and Colombia, and I strongly lean towards Colombia. If you've traveled at all, and especially if you've been to these specific countries, you know there's some pretty big cultural differences between all of these. And because of those cultural differences, there's pros and cons to each country or region as it relates to specific job roles or tasks. For example, the Philippines is one of the biggest outsourcing hubs in the entire world. The BPO industry, which stands for Business Process Outsourcing, basically outsourcing jobs, is the largest part of the Philippines economy. And as a result, there are millions and millions of people that are working in this specific part of the economy. What's funny is all of them got a taste of working from home during COVID, and literally no one wants to go back to the office. So it's created this huge surge of people applying for online jobs. What's cool about the Philippines is that it was actually occupied by the US at one point. So there's there's a ton of American influence in the country. They're all required to learn English in school growing up. And I've heard multiple stories about how they'll be at school, they'll go to order their lunch in the cafeteria, and unless they order their lunch in English, they literally will not serve them food. So they grow up speaking English, they grow up with this American culture integrated into their day-to-day life, and they really idolize foreigners and they like working for Americans. So the Filipino culture tends to be a little bit more shy, maybe a little bit more passive. This isn't everyone, but it's just kind of generally speaking. They're not incredibly strong with proactive communication. They tend to be better for like more repetitive roles. Let's say customer service, for example. If you're hiring someone to answer the phone, they're doing really repetitive calls. They're really good for those types of roles. Culturally speaking, the Filipinos are not as inclined to go into confrontation. They're a little bit more passive. For example, if they have a problem, they're less likely to bring it up to you. You're gonna have to go and ask them and pry it out of them. And because of this cultural aspect, they're not really good for sales. I wouldn't recommend hiring someone in the Philippines for a sales role where they're gonna have to handle objections. Maybe they'll have to like push back against the person and deal with conflict. Again, they're better for repetitive roles, back office roles, they're good for executive assistants, things like that. But overall, you can find amazing people there, from customer service reps all the way up to C-suite talent, to operations managers, and literally everything in between. You can find great people there. All right, let's move on to the next region, which is Egypt. So Egypt is obviously Northern Africa, it's in the Middle East, completely different culture from the Philippines. It's a predominantly Muslim country, and the people just have a completely different feel for them. So I find that they're really good for a number of different roles. Like they're very versatile, they're really good at customer service, they're better at cold calling, in my opinion, than the Filipinos because they're more aggressive, they'll deal with conflict, they'll deal with confrontation. So for this country, I'd say you can hire people for pretty much anything that you want. They're probably not as inclined to be happy in these repetitive roles that are very tedious, very menial, things that I personally would never want to work on ever. Whereas the Filipinos might like doing those roles a little bit more. Okay, moving on next to South Africa. So South Africa is a great place because they speak English as their first language. So the fluency issue is literally not a problem at all there. They have about a 30% unemployment rate right now as of 2025, which is crazy. So 1 out of 3 people do not have jobs. And as a result, there is a huge university educated population going online looking for work. So there's tons of great talent down there. They have a really unfortunate economic situation, and you can be someone that provides a very much win-win opportunity to them where you find great talent, they get a great job, and everyone's winning. As far as specific roles to hire from down there, I'd say you can pretty much hire for anything. I've hired people to manage my operations. I've hired people for sales, appointment setting, really anything. Just like Egypt, they're very versatile. And sometimes people will go and hire people from South Africa specifically, or Egypt specifically, just because of their personal preferences. If you're hiring someone that you're going to be working with quite closely on a day-to-day basis, sometimes you just want to hire someone that maybe you like a little bit more. Maybe they come from a similar culture, which makes communication and things like that just a lot easier. Okay, moving over to Latin America. So there's a ton of countries in Latin America. Obviously, you've got Central America, you've got South America. We predominantly focus on Mexico and then also Colombia. So one of the benefits of hiring from Latin America is that they speak Spanish. So if you need to put someone on the phone to speak to your Spanish-speaking customers, maybe you live in Miami, for example, you can hire from Mexico or Colombia or really even any other country in Latin America, and you'll have your Spanish-speaking needs well met. I also find that culturally speaking, people in Latin America, they like to talk. They don't mind confrontation. They can get on a sales call. They can push back. They can kind of battle with the person professionally. And they're not going to shy down from trying to close someone on a sales call. Whereas conversely, if I hired someone in the Philippines and they were getting a lot of pushback and objections, I would not expect that person to push back and close the person on the call. Now, with the sales team that I have in Latin America, I would expect them to do that. They're comfortable doing that. They don't mind that. They don't shy away from that. So in summary, Latin America is really good if you need Spanish speakers. It's good for appointment setters. It's good for salespeople. The appointment setters that I've hired in Colombia specifically, they're on it, they get it, they know how to communicate value right off the bat. They know how to get to the point. They know how to build rapport. They have great EQ, emotional intelligence, where they can get on the phone and they can really feel the person out and they can become a chameleon and adjust their approach depending on what kind of feedback they're getting, what kind of personality the person has, stuff like that. Some of the other people I've hired in the Philippines, they don't don't do that as well. They're a little more shy, a little more timid. Now, there's pros and cons to everything. So if you get people that are not afraid of conflict, not afraid of confrontation, well, that also carries into your own team and maybe even how they're going to interact with you. So in some roles, it's better to hire someone who's not going to speak up, who's not going to be a pain in the butt, who's not going to create all this conflict. For example, if you're hiring 50 people for customer service, you don't really want 50 people that are constantly like kind of thinking too much. But if you have 50 salespeople that are not thinking too much and they're timid, obviously that's not going to work. So personally, I like to tap into all these different countries around the world and pick whoever the best fit is for the specific role that I'm trying to hire for. And selfishly, I want to make sure that I hire people that fit into my team and into the culture and don't create problems with the other people they're working with. For example, if you go and hire 5 people in Colombia and then 1 person in the Philippines, the person in the Philippines is probably going to feel like a little bit off, culturally speaking. All right, so those are the countries that I personally hire from and that we also help our clients hire from. We have a staffing service where you work one-on-one with a recruiter, and that recruiter goes out and posts jobs and interviews about a dozen people a day up until we find exactly who you're looking for, and we only deliver you A+ talent. So if you happen to want some help with a done-for-you recruitment service to help hire $4 to $6 an hour virtual assistants in those countries that I mentioned, check out the link in the description. All right, so moving on to the next question. What kind of work can they actually do for you? So when most people hear the term VA or virtual assistant, their mind instantly goes to someone that is very low level. They're going to be doing data entry. Maybe they're living in like a place in the Philippines with chickens in the background, and they're just not really going to produce like super high quality work, but they'll still produce work that's really helpful and very valuable. Now, when I think of VA or virtual assistant, I just think of someone who doesn't live in the US, but is college educated, produces really high quality work, and is the equivalent of someone that I would hire locally, but they just happen to be working from home wherever they live. So simply put, to answer the question of what kind of work can they do for me, the answer is literally anything. Anything that you work on day to day, anything that your team's working on, any office job that you could possibly think of or conceptualize or put together, you can hire someone for in one of these countries. There's really no limitations. So some of the most common roles that people hire for are a general virtual assistant who's gonna be like a jack of all trades, doing all things admin work throughout the day. Executive assistants are big, cold calling, appointment setting, sales. Operations managers are a very popular role to hire for because you can hire someone, plug them into your business, have them manage your whole team, manage the day-to-day, build out new processes and really help you scale while you focus on other stuff. Social media managers, content creators, video editors. Roles like this are quite common. However, a lot of the time people will just take like a ton of random stuff that they need to delegate, package it into a role, and then hire someone for that. You can find people with master's degrees, you can find people with C-suite experience, you can hire former lawyers. There's really no limitation to who you can find. There's great universities all over the world. There's tons of educated people that are looking online for work. So it's really just up to your imagination for what you want to hire for. Okay, next question, which is a great question. How do I actually know they're working? So you hire this person, they're on the other side of the planet, they're working from home, you don't see them all day. It's not like they're sitting across your office. How do you know they're actually getting work done? How do you know they're performing? How do you know that they're not actually just taking your money, pulling the wool over your eyes, and treating you like a fool? Obviously, no one wants that to happen to them. So here's what you do to make sure they're actually productive without it taking up a ton of your time micromanaging them. So the first thing you can do is you go and get a subscription to a software called Hubstaff. So I have everyone on my team logged into Hubstaff. When they start their shift, they clock in, they clock out on their breaks and their lunch, and they clock out at the end of the day. This is really helpful with time tracking, especially at scale once you hire a lot of people. What's also cool is that Hubstaff will take screenshots of their computer screen every so often. So you, as the business owner, if you did want to micromanage a little bit, you can go into Hubstaff and you can literally see all the screenshots from throughout the day. It also has a lot of really cool features, like it'll track their mouse movement, and if it's been idle for too long, it'll flag you and notify you. Or let's say, for example, someone tries to game the system and they go get an auto clicker on their browser. That's just like moving their mouse around and clicking to basically BS Hubstaff to make it look like they're working. Well, guess what? Hubstaff's smart. It'll flag that. It'll tell you there's an auto clicker, and then then boom, you can catch them. You can also see in Hubstaff all the websites that they've visited throughout their shift, and it'll also rank them with their most frequently visited websites. So simply put, Hubstaff is a great tool. I pay a good amount of money for it because I have like 100 different people, but if you're only hiring one person, it's pretty darn cheap and it's worth every single penny. And no, I do not get paid for mentioning this at all, but I would love to if Hubstaff's watching. Okay, other than Hubstaff, which will track them, it'll show you what's going on their screen, etc. How do you know they're actually being productive? So for this, you need to set up certain processes to keep them accountable. There's a number of different ways you can do this. If you have a team and an established business, I'm sure this is pretty basic to you and maybe you can just skip this part. But for those of you who are a little bit newer, let me give you an example of how to do this. So I hired an appointment setter. Actually, I went and hired 3 appointment setters recently. And I had the same predicament. I'm like, oh God, someone on my team's got to make sure they're productive and they've got to check in on them because like, I'm not doing that. But you can set up a simple process just like this. Our sales team and the appointment setters, we all have a WhatsApp group that we communicate in throughout the day. The appointment setters were required to leave an end of day voice memo in the WhatsApp group, basically talking about what they worked on, any challenges they had, what they accomplished, things like that. And then they were also required to go into Go High Level, look up their phone number, look at the number of outgoing calls that they made, and take a screenshot of it along with the date. So I could see the number of unique calls that they made, and I can see the date to make sure they're not BSing me. And then they'll just post that simple screenshot in WhatsApp. And then they will also do the same thing for an appointment booking report in Go High Level. They'll go in there, they'll put in their phone number, they'll put in the date, and then they'll screenshot how many appointments they booked and put it in WhatsApp. So then at the end of the day, I can just go on WhatsApp. Literally takes me like 30 seconds. I'll say, okay, she made this many calls, she booked this many appointments. Okay, she made this many calls. She only booked that many appointments. Okay, well, why did she only make that many calls? And then I can instantly call her out in front of everyone and keep her accountable. Moral of the story, there's simple processes that you can set up that are not gonna require any of your time to manage the person, but you can still make sure that they're productive. In this particular instance, I'm having them push this information to me in such a way that they can't fake it or bullshit it. And I didn't have to ask for it. I can just review it. It literally takes 2 seconds, or I can have one of my team members review it. And then I know that they're being productive and accountable. And then also when you onboard this person, and then even as you're training them, or really even in the long run, it does help just to basically say like, hey, I'm watching you. And if you're not productive, you're done. You need to have more of an in-depth conversation than that, but you get the point. All right, moving on. Number 5, how do I train them? This is also a great question. So since you're working remotely and they're working remotely, how do you train them? Is that gonna be challenging? Simply put, the answer is no, it's really not that hard. What you're gonna do is you're gonna get on a Google Meet with them. You're gonna record that with a tool like Fathom. Fathom's really cool because it'll help you not only record the meeting, but it'll transcribe it, which you can feed into ChatGPT for some other cool stuff later on. And then it'll also give you a list of next steps. So say, for example, you go into the training and then you're done training them, and then there's some things that they're required to do afterwards. Instead of you or them having to sit there and make a list and like write all this stuff during the meeting, or even worse, after the meeting, you can literally just copy paste this from Fathom and shoot it over to them and you're done. So as you're training the person, you wanna also pull up a Google Doc and you need to build out SOPs as you're going. You need to make sure that you document the heck out of literally everything that you do. So you'll have Fathom recording the meeting and transcribing it. You'll have everything recorded in a Google Doc while you're building out SOPs. You're basically just gonna build out your training library right there. So simply put, you'll spend some time training them over Google Meet or Zoom, and then you'll have some other meetings where you'll come back into the meeting, you'll review what work they did with them, and you're recording this, don't forget to record it, and then you'll give them feedback. And then you're essentially just gonna rinse and repeat this process over and over until the person is trained and they're productive. Now, like I mentioned in some other videos, this is where you need to keep an eye out for some red flags. So while you're training the person, if you're seeing some glaringly obvious deal-killing red flags, you basically have 2 options. Number 1, you can double down or triple down on your training, or 2, you can cut ties and you can can them. So depending on what the red flags are and how extreme they are, I'll usually try to train them a little bit more because I don't want all the time that I spent looking for them and interviewing people and training them to go for nothing. But if the red flags are too serious or too repetitive and they keep doing the same stupid stuff over and over, I'll usually just be pretty quick to fire them and cut my losses. This is why you want to record all of the training and you want to document everything as you're working with them. That way your efforts weren't wasted if you have to fire them and go replace them. Or let's say you hire someone for the exact same role right afterwards. With the first hire, you didn't have any training materials built out, but then with the second hire, they can come in and absorb all the video recordings and the SOPs and everything you built out already, and they'll get trained that much faster. Okay, the last question I'm gonna go over with you in this video is, can I trust someone from another country? This is also a great question. So many people in the US have not traveled. They really haven't left the US. They haven't gone to many other countries, and we're kind of like just in our little island over here. And many people just are looking at people as like scary foreigners. It's kind of funny. And if that's you, I would highly encourage you to go travel the world. It's probably the best education that I've ever received. It's really opened my mind up. Okay, but anyways, to answer the question, can you trust someone overseas? The answer is yes. The way that I would look at this is the same way that I would look at this if I hired someone locally. Would I go in and give someone locally my bank account on day one with no history of working with them, no relationship, basically having no idea who they are? Absolutely not. So what you need to do is just use common sense. So just like if you hired someone in your local city, when you're hiring someone in another country, you need to watch your own back. That's what you need to do at all times throughout your company. Not in a paranoid way, but don't expose yourself to risk that just isn't necessary. For example, if you give someone access to a software and you're setting up their specific permissions, just give them the bare minimum permissions that they need to actually do the job and nothing more. For example, if they're in Go High Level and they're setting appointments, they don't need access to the payments tab, just shut that off. And they definitely don't need access to refunding payments. So moral of the story, don't be paranoid, but just like you would do if you're hiring locally, use common sense, limit permissions as much as you can, and then also just allow the relationship to develop organically over time. Make this person earn your trust. And then as they earn your trust and they have some seniority and some tenure and you work with them, maybe after a couple of years, you can give them a little bit more responsibility, a little bit more permissions. You can trust them with some more stuff. With all relationships in life, I tend to just go tit for tat. So I kind of ease into it. I feel them out. I see how they're behaving. If there's any red flags in terms of like honesty or accountability, stuff like that, I will immediately downgrade that person in my head in terms of how much responsibility and access I'll give that person within my company. Now, conversely, if they're very honest, they're clearly showing they're looking out for my best interests in the company best interest, I will trust that person more and give them more responsibilities. But if there's any big items, I would say reserve those for people that you really trust, or just do them yourself so you can sleep at night. But in my experience, after hiring 100 people outside the US and like a dozen or so in the US, I really haven't seen any difference at all. And in both scenarios, like I said before, I just hedge my bets. I look out for myself. I use common sense. Don't give access to data that's just not necessary. Things like that. Just use your brain and you, generally speaking, should be fine. So now you've got clarity on all the most common questions about hiring remotely. And if you want help placing a real A-player virtual assistant, that's exactly what we do. We've made over 1,000 successful remote hires at this point, helping hundreds of business owners build teams that run remotely without them even being involved. And then whether you need help with admin or marketing, sales, operations, it really doesn't matter. We can help you hire someone for any role that you could possibly think of. Click the link below to book a free call and see if it's a fit.